Action. Stand by for shooting. Turn over sound. Action.
Circles around. Then you come around, Malvina.
Okay. Do I look up now because she's looking up, or do I look up because there's some dust coming down?
Yes, you're looking up because all you see up there is some dust coming down. We'll give you no problem. Or here, or okay. And what we'll do is we'll do one close-up of you.
For sure, that working with puppets, it's clearly a case of us imposing a performance on those puppets, those poor things, because they have no volition of their own. I mean, they invite, what can you do with me? And that's a great, provocation. Actors, as actors are, it's something to not provoke, but to invite a performance, and it's something that we ask that they do, that they discover the character. I mean, you might say the delineation of that character might be quite small, but it's also quite precise.
I think also that all our life we've shot 8mm films, and we've always, it's shot in the real, as it were, the real world for us. And it's true that within the domain of puppets and animation, you literally create every bit of that realm. You create it and fabricate it. It's very hard to bring in the world outside, unless you're pulling in, you're using back projection, or I don't know, something like that, and you want to bring in another world. But I think the thing, and then going to live action was something that you really are open to a lot of elements of chance encounter, which is also equally something that we're attracted to, and working on a live action set
actually almost prohibits chance encounter because of the element of time. Everybody's looking at the watch saying, you've got 20 shots today, no chance encounters today.
But it's much easier on a live action set to say, let's go for take 2 or take 5 or take 12. Whereas with puppets, that's extremely demanding. To do 12 takes of one scene could take days and days and days.
But I think what's interesting is, like, for us to animate, we can say, all right, you animate it this time. And then he animates it, and you say, like, that's exactly the same. It's a 3 frames difference. We've done that, and it's...
Yeah. But I think the difference between, it's not quite the question, but it's that in the animation here in the studio, you have really a laboratory sequence, a situation that there's a lot of invention, there's a lot of discovery, there's a lot of, you can fail, make mistakes, but then rediscover things, whilst on a live action set, the pressure is so great with the getting things done on the set, that it really doesn't permit that sense of discovery that is really crucial to the way we work.
A lot of the initial, how do you say, like, elements of inspiration will be visual. So Alain will see something we throw down on the page, like on the table, we'll say, what about this painting by Magritte? This really is a lighting state that we should strive towards, achieve. Or the Berkelin Isle of the Dead. I mean, that's a kind of banner we should fly underneath. And with those visual images already on the table, it's a discovery, it's a constant atmospheric pressure.
I think in the process of writing or co-writing that there are no clear, in a sense, there are no clear delineations as maybe a normal script or another kind of script would have. All the composite sources, all the composite influences are already there when they come in the words on the written page, right? They're either presented to us as writers, or we evoke them in the writing. So we don't sort of like make a skeleton, a bare outline of a plot, and then add some dialogue, and then we don't say, oh, now let's think about the decor elements or the musical elements and so forth. Those other ingredients travel consistently through with us from the very, very beginning. And I, for instance, as the co-writer on this particular film, already had experience of working with them on especially on the other feature film and on some other shorter projects. So in a way I was like more in tune or attuned to their visual style and their visual aspirations and their desires. If I can just say also that one thing that I did learn is that if you want the skills of a particular person working on this film especially, are not again delineated by tradition or by custom or precedence. Because some of the best lines of dialogue were written by someone who you wouldn't have thought of as being a dialoguist. Some of the images, some of the, if you want, visual elements were suggested sometimes by myself. One always thinks of the scenarist or the scriptwriter as a non-visual person, which I've always found a bit ludicrous. But so in this experience, in the process of writing this film, I think everybody contributed not only their own skills and background knowledges, but things from other knowledges, other wisdoms that they had.
Our childhood outside Norristown was in a village, which was one of the single houses in that village before. By the time we left, there was like 50. Our father built it, and we were surrounded by trees, and I think that the stimulation there was absolutely zilch. There was nothing artistic that could have suggested that one day we might have moved into the cinema or anything like that, or picked up a pencil to draw a tree or something like that. It was very, I think we survived by being twins and looking in each other's eyes and saying, what do we do next?
But at the same time, our mother was a figure skater, so that was an element where music came into our life, along with her being a figure skater. And our father was a first class. Was it first class? You say?
Machinist.
First class machinist at Philadelphia Electric. So there was a whole mechanical side that he was fantastic at. I mean, in the sense that he built our house. He could repair the automobiles. He could do everything, which sort of put us to shame. But I think in a strange way, maybe it bled through into the actual making of things, creating our worlds in miniature. He actually worked life-size. We didn't. We did a huge retreat.
I mean, I think it could have been an impulse for sure. And even we have on our grandparents' side, one of them was from Germany, was a tailor.
And
so I think
carpenters on the other side.
So I think obviously,
I think it laid all the sort of
groundwork.
invisible traces, to build from. But although we were quite unaware.
But at that time in Norristown, we wouldn't have known that. We wouldn't have looked at our hands and said, "There's potential there," or "There's no potential."
Yeah, I think we basically were aimed. We played sports and baseball. That's sort of we were headed in that direction. I think we must have, as kids, we did a lot of drawing, and there came a point when, after high school, we had two choices. One was to go to a university where you could specialize in sport, physical education, sports, and the other one was the art college. And our father backed us up. He said, "It's your choice. You choose." And by then we'd met a very fine scientific illustrator, Rudolf Freund, who truly impressed us by his stature and by his abilities, and I think it deeply drew us to the world of art. And we'd go over there and we'd just sit and read in his library, and I think it was very important. And then we headed for Philadelphia College of Art, and then it started.
We never studied film. We only we did art, that was it. The film came much, much later. I mean, it's even as kids when we were drawing, we never thought of, you thought of TV, but we never thought of making films.
But at the same time, that when the impulse for film really came from being frustrated by doing the illustrations where it's like creating a frozen universe where there was no third dimension, there was no sense of movement, sound, music, all those things which we really wanted to put into the drawings wasn't there. And then we realized, like that famous line by Quay, take a drawing for a walk. And it was just saying, let's put movement into our drawings and create a three-dimensional world. But to do it, as we hadn't been trained in cinema, we thought, let's aim for animation because it's a private world. There were the two of us, and you didn't need a massive a team. It was just the two of us. It was fine. One light, a camera, and the two of us animating. So we started off doing some early cutout animation. And then years later, it led into making the first puppet films.
Where most people in these times are like 8 years old, they know they're going to be filmmakers. We were 32 when we made a puppet film. So there's a huge difference. I mean, not in the sense that you have to be a practicing filmmaker to make films, but you could be absorbing cinema. But I think it's true about the frustration with drawing and illustration.
The idea of doing a feature never entered into the equation, ever. It was always learning the craft and doing the short film. It was really through Keith, our producer, who suggested after doing Crocodiles that had we ever conceived of doing a feature. And of course we said, no way, we don't have the experience or the desire. But at the same time, at that point, we were reading Robert Walser and his institute, Benjamin, and we suddenly thought, doing something where it was more of a chamber work was something that we could actually handle. And also at that time we had been doing some theater decors and opera, and suddenly people didn't seem so all that intimidating to us. I mean, working with them, as opposed to working only with puppets. Well, I think the challenge at the beginning of the whole project really came, the impetus came from Channel 4 sort of going like this at us. Because after Benjamenta, we approached them, and they said that that they would, I don't know,
they would consider funding,
consider or tolerate another application, if on the following grounds: that we'd make something more accessible, that we'd work in a more definable genre.
We'd stop being twins.
That that there would be proper dialogues and not just monologues, i.e. in Benjamenta, and. It would have to be in color, not black and white. And so, naturally, in a sense, we said, we came back here and we just said, fine, no problem. We sort of said, okay, we're going to aim for sort of like, we've all three of us loved the South American writers, and we sort of thought, let's go for something in a kind of poetic science fiction. In other words, we'd be more interested in a hybrid form of that, and of that genre, and in a sense that's what, and there were certain South American writers that we knew together, and we said it has to be sort of, let's score that area and go for that, and that's really how the problem, the film the problem started.
Nice Freudian slip.
The project started, building it up like that, and then. And I think for us, it's a very organic way of working. This constantly, where the dialogue and the visual are actually moving forward, building, and sometimes it's a little bit like.
It was always a simultaneity of the two.
Yeah, I mean,
hand in glove.
Somebody might say, "Oh, well, it's not a classical narrative," and we'd say, "Well, yeah, but we don't mind that maybe it's got two wrists, or it doesn't have a head and it's got a funny torso, but it should have its own specificity. I mean, its own look and its own feel, and I think it's something that...
and it can even limp.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing we encouraged ourselves with, that we shouldn't anticipate something correct and perfect, that it should be slightly, suffering malnutrition or just be a bit deformed.
Yeah, well, yes, but it's not entirely an unknown factor what you will end up with. and it's not entirely a serendipity occasion, because it's simultaneously two things, if possible. I mean, it is at the one time very, very organic, yet at the same time there is an idea. There is an idea of a structure, a story structure at least, to where we want to go, but it's not plotted point by point. There is no storyboarding, and a great deal of accident is allowed to happen. A great deal of just day-by-day influences. Oh, I heard something on the way here in the tube, some smell, some sound, something. How can that fit in, you know? So all of those things fit into the finished product.
That's true.
At the level of script. I mean, I'm talking up to the level of script, because beyond what they then do at the level of shooting it and something that's, again, is entirely different.
Well, I know when we wrote the script that we had people in mind, and we wrote it with those people deliberately in mind. One or two were missing. Actually, one was missing. In the end, we discovered that once the money had come on board, certain people wanted certain impossible people, not from this country for sure, but and we realized that either that was a folly in terms of like production. There's no way we could afford such people, and what would they do to those roles? They would become so and so playing that role, and you wouldn't see the role or what we'd written, but or conceived of. But you might want to.
No, but in the end, after all these failures of looking for higher
echelon people,
we came back to the people who we wrote the script for, and that was Gottfried for Droz, Assunta playing Assunta Serna, Cesar playing the Felisberto character, and the only unknown person was Amira to play Malvina.
We'd actually seen another role that she'd done, and then we saw that. But by that time, we'd already chosen her. We found
the reason that we went to visit her in Paris, and we discovered that her mother was an opera singer. So we thought, I think it's telling us something. So we chose her. It's absolutely true that when Terry came on board, that the film was completely foundering and just basically non-existent, and by the mere fact that he put his name onto the project, that French and German money arrived, and lastly the English money came last. But Terry's good name, you know,
opened a lot of doors.
Instrumental.
It opened up the imagination of these doors. I think that's the
Terry
generosity that Terry has, is that he would say,
go for it.
I do my own pieces. You guys do what you do. There's nothing I could possibly offer. I mean, that's his humility also, but it's also his generosity. In mentioning the cinematographer Nick Nolan, I think it's important to say that we'd worked with him in some commercials, and we chose him for Beniamenta first, amongst all the possibility of cameramen that you could choose in this country. Also, we chose him because of his skills in his subjectivity with choreography. It was a dance film that really hooked us. And so in Piano Tuner, it was inevitable that we would choose him. And on the set, I mean, we had many meetings beforehand. We showed him those images of the Magritte and the Böcklin. It was in that context that we also had to face the idea that we were going to shoot in high def. And we chose to shoot in high def, and even he was willing to make the leap into high def. And I think that was something that was a gentle, but could also have been an idiotic challenge.
It came down to a very practical, it was a cost thing, because we've been shooting all our animation for the past 5-6 years on a digital camera. And if we had shot the live action with 35mm film, there would have been all these transfers. would have made the price go up. But if we shot digitally on high def, everything was synonymous already. So everything would marry all the better. So it was just, it was a practical decision that Keith and all of us made. And I think it was something that, I mean, we were happy that with Nick that we just said, let's just go for it. We all would rather have shot in 35, but let's just go for it on this occasion. A great deal of the villa was all done with models because we knew we weren't shooting on location, and that we were shooting in a studio, and that all we had in the studio that was constructed was the first floor up to just the ground floor of the villa. Everything else had to be composited.
Just two sides, a front and a side.
Yeah.
That was it.
That was all there was. So it was, in that sense, we knew from the start that there would be a lot of compositing between our model work and the live action realm. So there was a lot of blue screen, and there was no sea, there was no sky. It was just zero, and
it's pretty depressing.
Yeah. But you knew that that at the post-production stage that you would have a great deal of liberty and control at the same time to bring all these elements together.
It's an enormous post-production. In that sense, it was also discovering a lot that could be just tweaked, and I mean, Nick was there the entire time orchestrating the grading and the marrying invisibly any of the post-production effects. I mean, he followed it all the way through. A lot of cameramen could just say like.
I think that I mean, we're here talking about a lot of post-production effects, which, in terms of the big wide world, are probably
nil.
Yeah, zero. But I remember we were talking with Terry about, he was shooting Brothers Grimm, and he said, "Oh, I've got 750 special effects shots," and we said, "Oh, we only have 35." He was complaining gently, and but for us, because at the level of cost, I mean, we always felt that, and we've had almost 10 years to prepare for this film, and we were building the models and building the landscapes for this film, all in those years of when nothing was happening. So we had it, and we were slowly developing the possibility of how this film would look in the end, because ultimately, suddenly you realize, we're going to be shooting in Leipzig in a studio. You're not shooting in Portugal by the sea. There won't be a sea. Then you have to really completely change your way of thinking about, how do you make the sea work in a studio? To allow for the sea to mat in things. So it just became something very practical, and you got cornered quite a few times.
Well, there are different types of dialogues in this film, and at one point, a lot of pressure was put on us to have informative dialogue. I mean, dialogue, classical information given through dialogue. Pressure which we resisted to a large degree, I think. So, although there are some elements of dialogue which are basically and purely informative, there are others that come at the thing sideways on, and which in essence express the different worlds of the subjective worlds, if you want, of several of the characters. And on top of that, there are also various monologues, which again help to point in certain directions, and B, give an insight sometimes into the particular head state of the particular character. It's usually, and it's practically always, Felisberto, the piano tuner himself, who has the monologues, and it helps to orient him and us, because his journey very often is accompanied by great confusion on his part, and these monologues help to for us to see what steps he's taking and what directions he's going. The dialogues, again, were not an addendum to the story. They developed as we were writing the story. They were done simultaneously, no? And mainly two of us concentrated on the dialogues, myself and Timothy mainly. And in a sense, we have different strengths in our dialogue and
weaknesses.
And weaknesses, no. Yes. I mean, we're in a way catering, in this film anyway, to different needs, weren't we? No?
He's a better arbiter of probably that. I think in some respects that each of the characters has their own obsessions, and they come at the world with those obsessions, despite the fact that there's something rumbling underneath them. That there's a real life, and it's like they suddenly have an opportunity to open up, and they sometimes speak in a kind of coded language, and you think, where's that coming from, and why? But it's something that I think, for us, what's always fascinating if I'm on a bus, or any of us are on a bus, and you see a couple in the front arguing, but you can't hear a single word, but you can see it on their face. You know what's going on. You don't need to hear a single word. And in fact, it might be really banal, but there's this tension, and I think it's or perimeter dialogue that you hear out of shot, or behind you, that you say, that's really intriguing. But I know it's not something that in a film you can experiment with and say, like, well, that's the way we hear it. I mean, I can see a lot of people saying it's difficult, or it's a rough ride, or it's not what we expect of a standard.
I think the dialogue is stylized most of the time, very stylized, deliberately pushed to extreme stylization. In a sense, I think it fits in with the operatic undercurrent of the film. We were not aiming, obviously, for naturalistic words, no more than we were aiming for a naturalistic story. And I think some people may be, I don't know, confused or unhappy with the dialogues. In a way, to my mind, have failed to see they seem to require that dialogues in film be of a certain kind, and that they're not allowed to be, in an English language film anyway, they're not allowed to be stylized or overblown sometimes, even purple sometimes, deliberately, and musical and poetic. I'm not saying that we actually succeeded all the time with that, but that was very much part of our aim.
I think it's that's something that we noticed in the vast amount of criticism that it's gotten, is quite clearly that people object to the fact that it hasn't satisfied a certain criteria that they expect from films, rather than letting the film talk to them and riding with it. They're trying constantly to impose control over it, and we're rather surprised by that. I mean, I know the two of us, I mean, the way we all work is that, you know, you're open to the possibilities, the way of a film can move, and the way it can.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we succeeded in our aim. I mean, I'm repeating myself, but I think there's very much a question of cultural conditioning with Anglo-Saxon audiences. It's the great tradition of naturalism, which obviously includes the written dialogue word. And for this kind of film, I think, you know, it's nice if people leave those preconceptions at the door of the cinema and just allow themselves to float with it, with what we're attempting. I think that there are some people who accept it as part of the suspension of everything else, of the everyday world that you leave behind when you pay for your ticket, and you go along with it, and for them it works.
I thought that to pick up on that is also that the film, from the very opening title, basically announces a metaphoric universe. It says these things never happen, but are always. And I think that was written in the
3 BC.
3 BC, yes.
And we still haven't learned.
Yes, and it's sort of surprising that positing that little bit of information, people still,
Resist.
or they're constantly trying to wrench it into something that it isn't. And I think that's, for us, it was proposing a sort of an in-between world, which is, I mean, I think we all sort of have a horror of saying, oh, it's a dream or dreamlike, because for us it's that the whole film sort of operates in this in-between world where it's on a very fine line between, it could be Malvina's nightmare, it could be Duro's fantasy, sheer fantasy of this great abduction and perpetration of usurping a voice and using it like that. For Felisberto, it's a journey that goes very, very, terribly wrong. He gets the girl in the end, but only psychically. But he's trapped physically with her in the rocks at the end. And I think it was these elements of that the story can float in many different ramifications, but it's definitely, for us, in the sense of it is operatic without being, kitsch opera. Like you're going to see a full-scale opera. It isn't. It uses elements of theater and opera, but it's very much as in a dream. When, like we all say, we'll all wake up one morning and say, "I had the most fantastic dream last night," and it took place. It was operatic. My voice was stolen.
I think that to come in, to extend what you're saying, I think in a sense the film is a mixture of genre, and that may be another factor for some of the reactions to it, because it's not a pure science fiction film by any means. It's not a pure so-called Gothic film. It's not a pure dream play film. It has all of those elements, and it meanders or transforms from one context to another. I mean, stylistic context. And again, that's something I think that we sought. Again, it was conscious and deliberate. But I think again that it transgresses, if you wish, the normal kind of categorization of films. That this one is, this is a thriller and this one is a romance and so forth. But because ours obviously is a mixture of so many others.
Well, I know that coming from puppet animation, where we've never used dialogue. I mean, everything is told by gesture, by the use of the mask, music, sound realm. That's a very important element for us in creating. In Piano Tuner also is the visual realm and the sound realm, which is actually telling a great deal of the story equally as much as, say, the dialogues. And I think a lot of people just think that you can't be articulate with sound or dialogue, or that other than just creating eerie moods or something, but that it is creating a very subjective universe, and the film has notions of presentiments and déjà vu in it that were elements that we, there's the essential plot or the sense of the journey, which is here, but there's also that undertow that's just constantly pulling against those elements, which is where I think the real locus of the film lay at times. Well, we'd had originally commissioned music beforehand, and a lot had been written, and then there was we had a bad situation and weren't able to use the music in the end, so we resorted to library music for the main thing, which in a strange way provided an unexpected the last thing I think we would have ever thought of would have been a kind of love theme. I mean, it's sort of very, what's the word? It's sort of very
chaste.
Very chaste,
Although
and very stately theme, which was sort of became something that the film really did need, and also it was our homage to. Do we say the homage to? It was the music that Chris Marker used in La Jetée, and the story was that we've always known this music, and we eventually tracked it down that it was, you know, just library music at Boozy and Hawkes, and that the man who'd written it didn't even, I think he said he knew about La Jetée.
He'd never seen it.
Never seen the film.
Never seen it at all.
And that it was originally written as a ballet called The Unwanted, and that the music was, when we asked that we'd like to use it, that it was originally on 78, right? Shellac?
78 shellacs.
And they restored it, and we used it in the film. But and then he saw the film last Christmas, and then he died. So he was in his 80s, but he always worked under a pseudonym, which was Trevor Duncan, and. So we were very happy to use the music, and then we also used another young composer, Christopher Slasky, who was also through Boozy and Hawkes, and he made some further arrangements for us and added some other very special musics just for the automata scenes. And then there was also, we added a sort of sound, specifically abstract sound realms, which also was another further element to the sound design. Well, I mean, normally when we've done the animation films, we've always had the music up front, and we sort of always, I think for us always the music sort of is like to a certain degree a secret scenario. You can, like a choreographer, you read it and you interpret it, and then you set the images against it, and I think we like working backwards like that. But most animation does tend to have the music up front, and
well, that's what you did in Benjamento.
yeah.
But well, entire sequences were absolutely conceived with the music beforehand. I mean, in this respect, this film, although even during the shooting, we believed we had this original music. And even during the editing, we were laying down the original music. And then suddenly we realized we couldn't have that music, and we had to suddenly completely change. In which case, then we were applying music.
But again, even at the editing stage, I think you realize you have to shape, because we couldn't cut the music. It was written like that, and it's very hard. I mean, I know you can just fade out, but we don't like doing that. So you sort of shape the editing to the length of music and create the scene accordingly. I think that on every project that we've ever done, you want to strike new ground. You want to be. I mean, it depends sometimes if it's a commission or what, or whether we're doing the proposing. But it's something that, like even with this film, if Channel 4 did say those stipulations, it was something you say, okay, we can, we'll go for it. Let's be challenged. It's not that we would fulfill it. We'd have to fulfill it in our own way, but we would use that as a shaping to get us where we were hoping to get.
In the same respect, given, I mean, talking about music and being proposed by the BBC to do a film with music by Stockhausen, is a kind of that completely shattered any preconceptions we might have had about. Yes, we could have evolved from the last film and just carried on doing that, but because it was Stockhausen, music is so utterly cosmic, it makes you completely think of something entirely different. So although I believe that there's always an evolution, that slow evolution between one film to the next, it's been, because of the commissioning state, it's been like 3 years between each film now. So you have a lot of time to think.
I think also that with the piano tuner, almost from the word go, as we started to develop the theme, is that the element of the automatons and sort of making that the animation was a crucial element. I mean, nobody has to know that the automatons were really animated. The important thing is that the automatons should represent a degree of reality that Droz had conceived of to tell a story, or a parallel story that's actually happening at the same time on the estate, and that Felisberto tries to decipher as a detective. He realizes that the machines have initially a sort of charming front, but when the tides come in, they reveal further layers. And one of our ideas originally was that, depending on the size of the tide or depending on the barometric pressure, Droz would have introduced variations. So it would have been a series of, every automata could have gone through a massive set of variations.
In fact, 365.
For every day.
And that we could not have done a film. It would have been.
But at the same, but I think that although we've combined live action and animation, we've tended to do it only in the short films, and on this one we wanted to make that an integration, but at the same time where the animation through the automata, there's a sort of contamination of the live action world. You're never quite sure if it's, again, this undertow, whether the automata know more than what's going on in the estate, or they're totally even controlling Droz, or what. They're just they're sort of a perpetuum mobile. They're just there running their journey all by themselves. We always said it would have taken, it's as though the island was over an earthquake fault line, and that was an important element, and also the element of Felisberto, as though, yeah.
No, I mean, obviously the earthquake itself is the one thing that this Promethean character, Droz, cannot control. It's the one thing out of his control, right? Which is good. I mean, because that's the ecological message of the film. Because there are many layers and there are many messages, in a sense, to use a stupid word, and they too feed into the film and should be seen by the audiences as being there. And most people, most people don't seem to have read them. Which I think maybe, we should be blaming ourselves for that probably. But we don't want to shove it into people's faces. These are like subtext or sub-messages, subliminal even. So, there's even it's a political film, I could argue it, and say, yes, it's all about, power and control by this dictator figure, Droz. It's a rich cake, it's a layer cake. And in that sense, it's slightly jazzy, yes, and it evokes things in a listener's mind or the viewer's mind that, again, deliberately are not explicitly stated. Right? I think,
I was going to say that, to pick up on the earthquake, it's true that Droz, it's something he can't control, but what he stages in the finale of the opera is a sort of theatrical earthquake. You see a column break, and it's sort of timid by comparison. But Felisberto invokes, as a desperate final gesture, he invokes the earthquake to render apart all of Droz's whole world, and then the whole estate floods. And I mean, but we had the initial thought was that Felisberto was a sort of, he has the two rings which he sets, and he sort of, you feel he travels through earthquake countries, and he's very attuned to as a piano tuner would be, to the most microtonal sound, and in this case, a slight rumbling would make the rings jingle, and he'd be awake knowing that it's come, the earthquake's finally come, or, get out of here. But I think that for us, he was a sort of medium.
Yes, absolutely. He's a medium character.
And at one point, Droz says, "So you."
That line was cut.
I think it was cut, but you walk. You keep the earthquakes on
on a leash.
a leash, and Felix Berter says, "No, I walk in front of them." But I have a feeling that he knows where they are, and he knows a lot about earthquakes. So, but again, it's true. It was a subtext that maybe just gets lost.
Yeah, it's true. We were playing around, if you want, with classical mythological elements, not always in a true line, you know, but certain characters, certain like Orpheus and Eurydice and Hermes, you know, the medium, the messenger. And sometimes we just floated them in there, and sometimes they floated out again. But that's I think, part of the game. It was fun to do that, I think. Well, if somebody understood it at the first viewing, I mean, personally, I would be delighted, assuming that there is something to understand, because there's not always something to understand in that sense. But to come back to what you ask, yes, I think certain films do repay on repeated viewings, and you get a much broader or more nuanced understanding, and so forth. And I'm not, you know, I don't want. I'm not blaming audiences for not understanding. It's up to them. Each member of the audience subjectively makes up his or her own mind about it, and I don't particularly regard it as a failure if somebody doesn't like it. Although I may sort of insult the person or insult the critic, you know, and say, "My God, you know, come on, do stretch your own mind a little bit. Stretch something of yourself a little bit." I mean, I don't want to be too on the defensive about this film either, but yes, I think it's a film that would repay repeated viewing. Yeah,
Or at least one repeated viewing.
One repeated viewing.
But I also think that from our own sensibility, and we'd like it to aspire towards a musicality rather than a kind of the dramaturgy that's always like highlighted as being the most significant, and with that the quality or the elaboration of sound but I think people tend to just lock in on what is it saying to me, and it's from a very dialogue orientation, and I think that's also it's wrong for this film in that respect. Well, in an ideal world, it should be felt musically.
I mean, we always said that it's a sort of, the film would probably be better not being shown in cinemas, but like, for instance, if you had the luxury of showing it on a wall of music, you know, out in a landscape, projected onto water, a waterfall or something like that, you'd say, oh, it's like, you know, it's like the film is like a vast installation of Droz. You know, everything he's perpetrated could be the most wonderful operatic installation possible, and in that sense, it needs the plein air, you know, the outdoors, and maybe the cinema sort of constrains it in a way that
it doesn't liberate it, rather.
Yeah, and I know that we sort of feel that it's really cramped in that context, whereas it needs a different way to see it, to liberate it. Maybe we just need some different cinemas.